According to Wikipedia, a hand trap is an unofficial term used to describe cards, usually monsters, but more rarely traps, with effects that can be activated from the hand in the opponent's turn in order to disrupt that opponent's actions. The first of these cards, as crazy as it sounds, was actually Yugioh, whose ability to discard itself to let you take no battle damage during your opponent's turn technically makes it a hand trap. Hand traps were then released more frequently than you might think. Highlights include Gorz, the Emissary of Darkness, who was released in 2008 and was a very popular card during its heyday, as well as the bug itself, Maxi, which was released in 2011, but may have been too early for its time because it was not banned until 2018. Something which sounds crazy considering how impactful the card is on the game today, although I suppose it is legal in Master Duel in the OCG, so it's not that surprising. Nowadays, I would argue that there are 5 categories of hand traps, although this is up for interpretation, and I certainly could be forgetting some as well. 1. Those that warp how the game is played with massive effects such as Maxi or Dimensional Shifter. 2. Battle disruption such as Yugioh or a Battle Fader. 3. Removal, like a Ghost Ogre or a DD Crow. 4. Plays disruption such as an Ash Blossom or an Effect Veiler. And 5. Specialty effects that just encapsulate everything else, such as Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. Now, let's get to the main point of the video though, and why I believe we need to have a talk about hand traps. As some of you may have seen, Mulcharmy Purulia will be releasing in the Infinite Forbidden as a secret rare. A topic I initially covered in my previous video, Is the New Format Already Ruined? You can check it out up in the top right. And the discussion in the comments, as well as what I've seen on other sites such as Twitter, has made it obvious that this is going to be a very polarizing card. For those of you unfamiliar with it, since it's not out in the TCG yet, Mulcharmy Purulia has the effect that only if you control no cards, you can discard it, and then each time your opponent normal or special summons a monster from the hand, you draw 1 card. However, during the end phase, if the number of cards in your hand is more than the cards your opponent controls, plus 6, you must randomly shuffle cards from your hand to the deck until you have an equal number to the number of cards your opponent controls, plus 6. Now, at first, the card just reads like a slightly balanced Maxi, but there's a lot more to Mulcharmy Purulia than that, which I believe many players still misunderstand, considering the card has not been available to play or to see yet. First, let's start with its activation condition, which has 2 notable things. Firstly, you must control no cards to activate it, which makes it only usable if you're going second in 99% of situations, and dead if you draw the card going first or later in the duel. A bonus of its activation effect though is that it can be activated under Shifter because you discard it instead of sending it to the graveyard, unlike many other hand traps which are unusable under a Shifter, giving it a slight boost. Secondly, to its main effect, you only get to draw cards when a monster is special summoned from the hand, something which not every deck is consistently going to do, and even when they do, many will only do so a few times, making the payout for Purulia not as insane as it first reads. Obviously, sometimes it is going to net you a lot of advantage, but there are also going to be times when it will do nothing and is just a -1. Additionally, when you draw more than one of it, it's almost guaranteed that that second one is going to be a dead card, because of how near impossible it's going to be to activate the card a second time in a winnable grand game. Finally, the last thing of note is its restriction that you can only activate one other Mulcharmy effect the turn you activate this card, which points to us getting more Mulcharmy cards in the future, potentially proving to be an interesting hand trap archetype? Question mark? In comparison to the hand trap categories we established previously, I would only put Mulcharmy in the specialty category, not the ones that warp how the game is played like its father figure Maxi. And yet, the card is $75 pre-sale right now, when it reads like a side deck only card. I believe that players are weighting too heavily that it just reads like Maxi, and not looking at the fine print, although the price tag could certainly be influenced by the fact that it's only a secret rare. Back to its design though, I think that it is pretty good for hand traps, as it's one that does not blow the game out, but can still create advantages, and feels as though there is some skill required, in terms of knowing what matchups to side the card in, and what matchups to leave it in the side deck. Unlike a Maxi, which can be fired in the main deck easy peasy. Hand traps are some of the most delicate cards in the game, and with how impactful they can be, it's important that those that are really strong don't feel terrible to play against. Just imagine if every hand trap felt like playing under a Shifter or a Max C. Players would hate it. On the other hand, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and Infinite Impermanence are the two cards with the highest usage in the format currently, and although they are hand traps that see more play than Shifter, their impact on the game feels far more fair and skillful, while also just being more usable cards. I think that this approach is what is attempting to be done with Purulia, which I am excited to see. The card reads as broken, but realistically, in many games, a player is not going to feel pressured to not use their 1 or 2 special summons from the hand, and, depending on the meta, could easily keep oppressive decks that end up special summoning from the hand a ton in check. Unfortunately, I'm sure there are going to be some rogue decks who currently special summon from the hand a whole bunch that are going to be negatively impacted by Mulcharmy Purulia, and that's not something that I'm sure I know how to feel about right now. This seems like a situation aimed at the top decks, and rogue strategies are just left to fend for themselves, with some to suffer and some to benefit. One easy example I can think of off the top of my head is Sky Striker, who actually benefits from the presence of this card, because they rarely special summon from the hand. If they do, it's only once, while they link summon several times in turn. In conclusion, I believe hand traps are actually in a good spot right now with the upcoming release of Mulcharmy Purulia. The most problematic one is probably Dimension Shifter, and its annoyance of banishing everything. But the decks that can play this card, such as Kashtira or Fluandereeze, actually play into Mulcharmy Purulia quite well, which should in turn lower the play rate of these decks and lower the presence of D-Shifter. Other impactful hand traps such as Ash Blossom, Imperm, or Ghost Ogre can only interact with an opponent at one specific juncture and require skill to know the correct juncture. Plus, larger ones like Nibiru have more harsh requirements and can be played around easier than these small ones, which I think is a good comparison to Mulcharmy Purulia, and Nibiru isn't too big of a problem right now. This interaction between players on each other's turns is something that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Stick out, and, if done right, can make the game feel more fun. So, thank you for listening to me ramble about hand traps, and have a great day, everybody.